grew up in Florida, and it seems like most teenage guys, when you live there, you embraced one of two hobbies. You embraced either surfing or skating. And again, I grew up like 10 minutes from the beach. Surfing was not my thing. I hate the beach. I hate the sand. There's nothing fun about the beach at all. Though ironically, that's what I do now when I go there, because that's what you do when you don't live there. You go to the beach. So skating it was for me, right? I have so many good memories with my friends late at night with skateboards, just hanging out front underneath that lone street light on our block. Skating, right? We built ramps. We had rails. I remember just having fun building these things. I remember falling and getting hurt a lot, going to local shopping centers and using the curbs and loading docks and different gaps there in the parking lot, just having fun, right? Because at the time, and I wish we had this now, but so many communities now have skate parks, right? This was not a normal thing 20-something years ago. It was very rare to have a skate park, especially one that was free you could go to. But there was one in my area that I did go to once or twice. You had to pay some money, so I didn't go often. But when you went there, right, you kind of had to relearn in many ways how to skate, because skating on a ramp or a half pipe of some quarter pipe is significantly different than just skating on the street and doing curbs and rails and that type of stuff. And so when you would get to a skate park, just pretend with me for a moment you're at a skate park, you'd walk up to a ramp like this on the edge, and it's kind of intimidating, right? In fact, it makes for a great slide. But you would walk up to the edge, and you got your board, and here's the edge, and you got they call it the coping. You put your board over the edge, and you have your foot up top. And for you to go down, you would have to really stomp your front foot and put a lot of weight into it and lean down. And most people, when they're first learning, myself included, it's awkward, right? It's not a normal human response when you're going down an incline like that. Because the normal human response is to lean back. And as soon as you lean back, the board flies out from under you, and you slide down, and usually you're okay. It's not that big of a deal. Right? But the human tendency is not to lean far forward. It's to lean back. Because leaning forward doesn't feel normal, right? Because in most situations, if you were to lean that far forward, you would just fall over. Right? So your feelings can lead you astray. Right? Because all of us are going to go to a skate park after this, right? So now you know. But here's the thing, again, your feelings can lead you astray. Just because it doesn't feel right doesn't mean it's wrong. And at the same time, sometimes when things do feel right, it is right. So our feelings are not always the best indicator of what we should do with our lives. Here's the thing, doing what feels right can make you fall on a skateboard. And doing what feels right in our life and so many other places might not always be the best for us. Right? So if we live our life guided by our feelings, more often than not, we're going to find ourselves dealing with some problems. On a simple realm, right? Sometimes, right, eating junk food for every single meal for you might feel acceptable because you're busy, but over time you'll pay the price. It might feel right to smack someone in the face because you're angry with them, and just because you feel angry doesn't mean that's okay. Right? Maybe you're dating someone who isn't a good fit for you because you simply feel lonely. Maybe you spend money that you don't have because you just don't feel like saving up or waiting for that purchase. So again, our feelings can lead us astray. Just because we feel like something doesn't mean it's a proper thing to act on. And that's just kind of the simple things in life, right? This applies to so many areas of our life. Maybe you're avoiding a difficult conversation with someone today that you need to have simply because you don't feel like being uncomfortable. Maybe you're considering, right, leaving a marriage because you don't feel like you're in love anymore. Maybe there's a sin habit that you just keep back to and giving into because you don't feel like it hurts anyone. And again, our impulses and our feelings, if we're not careful, can lead us astray from God if we're not careful. Right? The same idea, right? Just because we feel something, just because our body and mind desire something, doesn't mean that's what's best for us. Often, we'll make choices that benefit our flesh and that neglect the needs of our soul. Our feelings are a God-given thing, right? He gave them to us. They're important, but they need to not be the only thing that guide us in our life, because there's more to consider than just our physical needs, but also our spiritual needs. Because sometimes our feelings go against what our spirit needs. So here's the thing. We often will misunderstand how the body and the soul are connected to each other and how they'll often compete with each other. Right? The desires of our flesh, our feelings are sometimes diametrically opposed to the needs of our soul. And so what I want us to discuss this morning, see that question there on your notes, what do we need to understand if we are going to better navigate the tension between the desires of our body and the needs of our soul? So we are back in, you guessed it, 1 Corinthians, week 7, looking at chapter 6, verses 12 through 20. We're finishing up the chapter, and we started this 7 weeks ago, and I entitled the series From Drift to Direction. Because Paul is here writing a letter to a church that has begun to drift. Right? He spent over a year and a half of his life there with this church, training them and teaching them. And now Paul has left to pursue other ministry items, and he's getting news that this church is strayed. They have strayed from what Paul has established for them. And so he's writing this letter to help reorient them. And it turns out, right, he's learned that they were doing many things in their life because to them it felt right. And they are neglecting the way God created them. So the church is doing what many people in churches do. They're doing what they want to do. They're doing what feels right. And often if we allow just our physical needs to control our actions, we'll find ourselves in trouble, just like the Corinthian church did. So what do we need to understand if we're going to better navigate the tension between the desires of our body and the needs of our soul? Because some of us here today, myself included, right, we struggle sometimes with just giving in to what we want, giving into our feelings. And again, our feelings are not bad, but we need to consider how those things impact our soul. So I have a small clip for you here I want to play, and then we'll discuss how this relates to our message here in a moment. All right. So there we have a small scene from Jurassic Park. Have you guys have seen that recently? Or even at all? Okay, yeah. It was on Netflix not too long ago, and they just took it off. And I only got halfway through it before they took it off. That's the way I watch movies. It annoys Paige so much. I'll stop in the middle because I want to go to bed. All right, I showed that scene to you, right? For you who have not seen Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum is there. I believe he's like an expert in chaos theory, where he's there to kind of determine, right, what things can go wrong in this park. And obviously, I mean, this is literally the plot for Jurassic Park. Things always go wrong. But he's there, and he's hearing the story of how this park got created and all of the interesting science that allowed them to resurrect the dinosaurs. And there was a statement there, right, as I was reading through the passage we're about to read through in 1 Corinthians, there's a statement he made there that came to my mind that honestly applies to us as well, right? He's talking about their desire to get this park open, their motivation to create these dinosaurs, and he makes this statement, right? Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they did not stop to think if they should. Right? So Jeff Goldblum there, he's stating his thoughts that the creation of the park, all those dinosaurs, might be a problem. Right? The problem wasn't could they, but should they? And that's what he's drawing attention to. All right? Just because you can build a park full of dinosaurs doesn't mean you should. Right? If all these movies have taught us something, maybe we shouldn't do that. And here's the thing. You're going to see this show up in our text today, and this applies to us as well. Right? There are a lot of things in our life that we can do that maybe we shouldn't. Right? So just because we can doesn't mean we should. And often what you'll see is you give in to things that you can do, you'll experience some real chaos just like they did in Jurassic Park. So let's go ahead and finally dive into our text here, and you'll see where I'm getting this at. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, Paul writes, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything." So you'll see that phrase, right, come up there multiple times. I've kind of noted it there in red. And what he's doing is he's highlighting a saying that kind of had become ingrained in the context of the church. And theologians debate if this is something just the church said or if this related to the Mosaic law, right? They're not under the law anymore. Or this is just kind of a saying culture, right? Everything's free, right? We live in a country that's free. You can do what you want. And that, at the very least, was the mindset of the Corinthian church when Paul writes this, right? All things are lawful for me. And what it did was it emphasized the fact that there's no restraint on what they can do, right? And this was certainly enforced by their culture, but apparently practiced in the context of the church. And it gave them permission to do whatever they wanted to, right? Just because they could didn't mean they should. And there's a problem in the context of this church. You'll see it show up with sexual immorality, right? Engaging with prostitutes, right? Legal in their culture, but not the best thing for them to do. And so taken to extremes, when we embrace all things are lawful for me, it gave the church permission to engage in whatever actions or behaviors that they wanted to, right? They gave themselves the green light to do whatever felt right. And as we mentioned already, just because something feels right doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for us. And so Paul throws down this red flag by filling them in on the reality of what's going on. And what he does is he highlights two types of liberty here. Let's break this verse down a little bit more. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, the first part of verse 12. He says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. Right? Just because something is legal in the United States doesn't mean it's helpful for your walk with Jesus. Right? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is what he's highlighting. Right? Because the Corinthian church has been engaging in behavior that may or may not have been wrong. Some of it absolutely was wrong, but there was more going on there than just engaging with temple prostitutes. Right? They are harming spiritual health. And so he's drawing attention to the reality that just because something's legal, just because you have the freedom to do it, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be helpful for you in your walk with Christ. Right? For them, right, engaged in morally wrong behavior such as prostitution in their culture was legal, but obviously not healthy. Right? There's other things that could have been going on. Maybe there was disagreements between spouses, and maybe one spouse is cheating on another spouse. Again, legal, not helpful. Maybe some of them are doing something as simple as just forsaking the gathering of the assembly. Right? It's legal to miss church, but it's not necessarily helpful to not be an active part of one. So you see that, right? That legal, but not helpful. And again, we do the same thing in our lives. Right? The engagement of pornography, which is so prevalent in our culture, legal, but not helpful. Failing to make attendance at church a priority. Again, we don't make an idol out of attendance and at our church. But the reality is if you're not here regularly, consistently, it's okay to not be at church, but it's not going to be helpful for your spiritual life. So there are so many things that we engage in our life that are legal, and they might be considered moral in our culture, but are not helpful for us as followers of Jesus. Right? So Paul is drawing attention to that messed up view of Christian liberty. And so he has that first view, right? Things that are legal but not helpful. And then he has this other view. You see it in the second part of chapter 6, verse 12. All things, again, right, are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. And so, again, he's calling attention to the fact that just because something is legal and accepted by the culture doesn't mean it's good and helpful for you. So, for example, in our culture, it's legal to have alcohol. It's legal to partake in some different substances. Some states allow it, some don't. There's a lot of things in our culture that are legal, but it might not be helpful for you to engage in. Right? It might entrap you. It might dominate you. Right? It's totally legal to fill your schedule up, but it will run your life. It will dominate your life. It's not helpful for your spiritual life. It's legal to have a hobby that you love and enjoy, but to overly engage in it, it will run your life. It will kill your spiritual life. Some of us are slaves to our phones and social media. Legal, once again, yet it dominates our life, right? So just because there's things that we want to engage in, just because we feel like engaging in things, just because it's legal and accepted by our culture, doesn't mean it's helpful for us. And some of these things you'll see as well, they might be dominating for other people, and other people don't have a problem with it. So this is just important for us to consider. We are not just physical human beings, but we are spiritual human beings. And so we need to consider not only our physical needs, but our spiritual needs. And this is something the Corinthian church had struggled to do. They were being guided around by what they felt like doing without considering their spiritual lives. So, what do we need to understand if we're going to better navigate the tension between the desires of our body and the needs of our soul? We need to understand that permission does not equal profit. Right? Permission does not equal profit. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right? I want to give you permission to say no, right? Just because you can build a park full of dinosaurs doesn't mean you should, right? Just because, right, you can overly fill your schedule doesn't mean you should. Just because you can get a divorce doesn't mean you should. Again, permission does not equal profit. And every single one of us, every single day, have choices to make. Consider your life. Consider how you spend your time and energy. And as you consider, is this profitable for my life? Here are two questions to consider. Does God permit it? Right? There are many things in our culture, there are many things in our country that are legal to do, yet it is not something that God permits us to do, right? There's some big topics. You guys can figure those out. A lot of things that are legal to do, but God does not permit. And then there's a lot of things God permits that might not be helpful for your soul either. So as you're making decisions throughout the day and you're maybe wrestling with different choices, two important questions to consider is, does God permit it, and is it helpful for my soul? Is it helpful for my soul? So years ago, I remember hanging out with a group of, to me they're kids now, but high schoolers, when I was in high school, and they would brag about the fact that they had success shoplifting from the local convenience store, right? And they would tell me that their strategy was they would go into the store. I'm going to give you guys, it's actually pretty interesting. They would go into the store and they would pocket an item, and then they would take another item and they would go to the register and check out, right? So they would do the buy one get one free discount. And they thought this was genius, right? Because the clerk would maybe not suspect it because they're actually paying for something. They just walk in the store and walk back out. And they were stealing usually food, right? Small snacks, things that weren't of real significant value. Now, maybe some of us have thoughts about that. I definitely do. But I have a couple questions for you to consider. Who made their body? Who made our bodies? Well, God did. But didn't God design us to consume food? God made our body, designed us to consume food. Yes, He did. And what happens if we don't eat food? Right? We will die. Right? It's pretty simple. So is it okay to steal food if you're hungry? But didn't God give us that feeling of hunger? Right? God designed our bodies, and He designed us so we're hungry. So wouldn't it be okay just to do what you feel like to get food so you're no longer hungry? All right, that's a weird, interesting rationale, is it not? And most of you guys see the flaw in that thinking. But therein lies our tension for so many of us today as well. Again, being guided around by our feelings and what we want and what our body desires. And just because our body desires something doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for our soul. Right? When we are making decisions, we need to be careful because feelings should not be the only consideration for the choices that we make. What do we need to do if we're going to better navigate the tension between the desires of our body and the needs of our soul? We need to realize that we are both biological and spiritual beings. Right? We are biological and spiritual beings, right? God has made us in this way. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13 through 14, one thing that the Corinthian church was struggling with is this topic of sexual morality. Right? They were doing what felt right. Right? Their body was designed to engage in intercourse, and they figured if this is what I want and this is what I feel like doing, then it must be right. And so that is one of the main issues that this church is dealing with, but the application that Paul is, the application of what Paul is writing has so much for us to unpack here. So, chapter 6, verse 13, he says this, food is meant for the stomach, and the stomach for food, right? What he's saying there is God literally designed the stomach to take and to process food, and God gives us food, so the stomach has stuff to process for energy for our body, right? This is the way God made us. God designed us. So food's meant for the stomach and the stomach for food. This may have been a saying at their time. This may have been a saying in the context of the church. Paul is referencing something we don't know for sure, but he tells us that God will destroy both one and the other. He says the body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. So Paul is, again, talking not only about how God designed the body for the stomach to process food and food for the stomach, though he notes that will not always be the case. We have this biological function God has given us, right? This desire and this need to eat. And how we take care of these biological functions impact our soul. Right? Just like, right, if you're stealing from a convenience store to fill your stomach, that's going to do something to you spiritually, and you might be doing something to you in this world if you get caught, okay? How we deal with these feelings is going to impact our spiritual life. Now, skip down there. He says the body is not meant for sexual immorality. Right, we have a biological function as human beings, right? Reproducing, intercourse. God designed us to engage in that capacity within certain parameters of marriage. Right? So we have a biological function, and depending upon how you satisfy it, it will impact your soul in a positive or negative way. This is what he is getting at. Just because we feel like doing something doesn't mean it's the best for us. Just because we have that biological need does not mean that we need to act on it because it can impact our soul negatively. At least act on it the way we feel like acting on it. God tells us here that he designed us for himself. So our body, the way that we behave, is meant to interact with our soul, which is the way in which we interact with our Creator. Right? We have biological functions that impact our souls. So how we use our body impacts our soul and impacts our relationship with Christ. Verse 14, God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. Right? We, as followers of Christ, are unified with him in body and soul. And when we just allow our feelings and desires to dictate our actions, we put our body and soul at odds with each other. Right? By engaging in certain behaviors, it's pulling you from Christ. And so even if it's lawful, it does not mean it's helpful. The Corinthian church failed to realize this. And they were struggling spiritually. And again, maybe you're struggling spiritually today because you have failed to realize this as well. Just because society says it's okay, just because you have this desire, acting on it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good thing. It can hurt your relationship with Christ. So we are biological and spiritual beings. What do we need to understand if we're going to navigate the tension between the desires of our soul, the desires of our body, and the needs of our soul? Well, no matter what, marriage is tough, but it gets more difficult when partners in marriage refuse to give up autonomy, right? Because you have two individuals, often two very independent individuals, coming together in marriage. And if you do not give up your autonomy, you're going to struggle to be connected, right? It's the conversation of my money versus your money, right? Your kids, my kids, my schedule, your schedule. And most of us know for any successful marriage, right, you got to come together. And so marriage is never about the loss of identity, but it's about the surrender of isolated independence, right? When two people fail to yield, unity becomes impossible. And here's the thing. If we serve only our feelings, we are not serving God. Right? We are not acting as unified partners with him. Right? We are tearing, right, our body and soul apart in many ways, and we are tearing ourselves away from God. Right? If you don't yield to him. Here's a next blank for you. What do we need to understand if we're going to better navigate the tension between the desires of our body and the needs of our soul? We need to realize that autonomy is no longer our identity, right? Just like in marriage, when two couples or when two individuals come together, they are no longer one or the other, but they're now combined, right? There's identity that merges, and this is true when we follow Christ as well. We have an identity that merges with him, and so autonomy is no longer part of our identity. right? Things that we do in our body impact our soul and our relationship with him. Check out how Paul brings this up in the next few verses. Verse 15, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never, right? And again, kind of talking about that connection that's created through intercourse. And so he's saying, right, you have this connection with God, and you guys are one and the same, and now you're having relations with a prostitute. Not good for your spiritual life. He says, do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute is one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. And he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. So again, obviously the Corinthian church had a serious problem with sexual immorality, but this certainly applies to many other areas of life, right? Because of our connection with Christ, everything we do impacts our relationship with him and ultimately reflects upon him. Paul continues, verse 18 through 20. He calls them to flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, right? You are no longer autonomous, for you are bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. So again, verse 18, right, that sexual sin has a spiritual component that bonds two individuals together. And sin through sexual sin is a sin not only against ourselves, but against Christ. And I would say the same thing for many other sins that we're engaged in, right? Sexual sin has this different level of connection, but there's a lot of other things that we do in our body that create a disconnect between us and our Creator. And that's why he says in verse 19, right, we are not our own, right? When you commit your life to following Jesus, the Holy Spirit indwells you, and you guys are now unified. You're no longer autonomous. And so you are not only just sinning as an individual, but you're dragging God into that. You are not your own, you are Christ. And he concludes there in verse 20 telling us that we have been bought with a price. Right? It's the image almost of a slave market, right? He bought us with his blood, he purchased us. We are his now. Autonomy should no longer be our identity. If you claim to be a follower of Jesus, your life is no longer about you. Does your life reflect that reality, or are you still being led around by your feelings and what feels good and what you want to do? Are you aware of how these actions and behaviors that you're engaging in are hurting your relationship with Christ? Because it was hurting the Corinthian church, and it will hurt our church as well. Not just sexual sin, but so many other sins and things that we engage in that are not profitable for us in our relationship with Christ. Autonomy is no longer our identity. So to kind of get this right, it takes practice, right? Just like if you decided to go to the skate park today and try to drop in on a ramp with a skateboard, it'll take practice, right? It'll take practice to process that maybe your feelings are leading you astray. And so it takes practice to build this discipline, but we need to get better at it if we want to grow in our walk with Christ. So we need to remember that permission doesn't equal profit. That we are created as biological and spiritual beings, and that autonomy is no longer our identity. Two questions for you to consider as we finish up. What activities or behaviors do you have that fall into the category of legal but not helpful for your soul? Every single one of us have categories like that. And then how have these impacted your spiritual well-being? Let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. God, thank you for this message, and Lord, I'm thankful it was the Corinthian church that you are writing to and not our church or about my life, because there's categories in my life, Lord, that I engage in that are legal but not helpful for my walk with you. And so, Lord, I know that there is something for everyone here where there's things that we're engaged in that might be legal by our country standard or cultural standard, might even be acceptable in the church, but maybe not the best thing for us. So, Lord, I pray that we look at our lives, we consider what we do and how it impacts our relationship with you, and that, Lord, may we have the courage to say no, to choose a different path, and to ultimately do what will bring us closer to you. So, God, I pray for the individual who's struggling today, maybe living in sin, because they've just been doing it because it feels good. But Lord, may they have the courage to walk away from that, to seek out help, and to ultimately grow closer to you because of it. God, we love you. This is something we all need. And so, Lord, help us to apply it to our lives. In your name, amen.